So I thought today maybe we'd try a change of pace. There are several contemporary issues that people talk about a lot and which bear on Jewish beliefs and Jewish life, and could be useful to get straight on, because sometimes they come up in discussion or a debate or in criticism. And one of them is multiculturalism. Now, like a lot of those words, it means different things to different people. So I'm going to start by discussing one meaning the word has that I know of. But if it has other meanings to you, I'll be happy to try to deal with those concepts as well. And the starting point for me is multiculturalism has two propositions. One proposition is that we ought to treat all cultures equally, give them equal respect and equal validity and equal credibility and equal value. We shouldn't discriminate between cultures. That's what we should do. The second proposition is why we should do that. The idea is, if you thought that you could say that one culture was superior to another, how would you do that? What features, what criteria would you use to say, well, this culture has Q, and this culture doesn't have Q, so this culture is better than that? Wouldn't you be speaking from within your own culture? Wouldn't you be using your own values to decide that having Q is better than not having Q? Which would mean that you're using the standards of your culture to determine other cultures' value. And that sounds like it's invalid. So the conclusion they want to draw is that since there are no objective, neutral standards to evaluate cultures, therefore all cultures should be treated equally. Now, there's a lot wrong with what I just said, but I would like to start with a simple logical observation. It seems to me that the reason they give for their position contradicts their position. From the reason that there's no neutral, objective way to evaluate cultures, it doesn't follow that you should treat cultures equally. That's the wrong conclusion. Can you see where I'm coming from? What should you say rather than you should treat all cultures equally?
All cultures are equal.
You hear what I'm doing? Start from the premise there's no way to evaluate cultures objectively and neutrally. Because when you say that one culture is better than another, you're speaking from your culture.
Your culture is the best culture, and the rest are equal.
Oh, okay, your culture is the best. But then, if my culture says they're not equal, why should I conclude that they are equal?
But you're speaking from your own culture, which believes that all cultures are equal.
Okay, so now notice that if evaluating cultures is prejudiced, and therefore it's out of bounds, not only can't I say one culture is better than another, I also can't say that they're equal. That's an evaluation. To say two things are equal is evaluating them.
So you just can't evaluate any.
So you can't say anything.
Right.
You can't say one culture is better than another, and you can't say they're equal either. And if you can't say they're equal, there's no reason to treat them equally. Why should I treat them equally? No basis for that.
Because
Treat them as I feel. Treat them by the way I like. What have you got to say to me?
But that aligns, treating people equally aligns with the moral, social norms of
Yes, and it will play in San Francisco, and so forth and so on. But that wasn't the reason that was given that I was considering. The reason was, since you can't evaluate them objectively and neutrally, so you can't evaluate them, period, so stop evaluating them, and therefore, for that reason, that you can't evaluate them, for that reason you treat them equally.
Right.
But it doesn't follow you should treat them equally. It follows there's no principled way to decide how to treat them. So if that's the position, it's not even internally consistent. Now, you want to take a remark about the propositions that I was talking about? A different remark.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that a good way to evaluate something is based on its marketing approach, right? I would say the Jewish culture is something where you don't see people, walking around with signs saying, "Oh, come convert, come convert." It's a culture and a religion that's more based on attraction versus promotion. If you look at the Islamic world or Christianity, they're typically promoting it like crazy for people to join. Muslims, some, I would say the more radical ones have a different approach. It's a little bit more aggressive, but we don't have to get into that. But Judaism is one of the things where its attraction is by someone seeing the light in it, and their entrance into it, it's not an easy entrance. They're getting pushed away constantly. It's a 1 to 3 year process depending on the level of the conversion. So I think to say that they're equal religions, okay, that's wonderful and all, but I think you could tell which one's a little more prominent in the sense that they were the ones that answered God last and said, we'll be your chosen people. I think that the religion itself speaks a lot for its history and then its approach today for people to either join or how they're representing the religion on a global scale.
Okay, so you're taking a very interesting approach to this. You have criteria for evaluating things, and it could be that in Somalia they wouldn't agree with those criteria. It could be in Central Africa they wouldn't agree with those criteria, but that doesn't bother you. You're saying, look, here are certain things that are valuable, here are certain symptoms of internal strength and internal weakness, and if you have to use a gun to get somebody to come over to your side, sounds like your ideas and your values and your history aren't enough. You got to threaten him and you got to force him. So that means that the attraction is an attraction just of compulsion, whereas a system that doesn't use compulsion seems to be internally stronger and internally more genuinely attractive than one that has to use compulsion. So, in the end, I'm going to agree with you 100%. I think we shouldn't be embarrassed about using our own criteria. Even though I'm using my criteria to evaluate another culture, I don't think we should be embarrassed about that.
I'm saying more in the sense of like for face value, not with the influence because I was born Jewish. It's just more of if someone looks at it from an outside perspective, they can clearly see the way that if they really look at it, the truth, not the fake narrative, etc. But if you look around at the world, I don't really know anyone that's seen people standing out other than offering to put on tefillin if they're already a Jew, but they're not really promoting anything. They're just asking, "Oh, did you put it on today?" They're not waving signs around saying, "Oh, come learn about the truth, the gospel, whatever." So I think for face value, I think most people can agree that it's a different approach to religion in the sense of getting people involved or not.
So it's a different approach. The question will be whether it's reasonable to go on to say, and it's a more valuable approach.
I think it's a more humble approach.
But I think that's because it aligns. Going out and spreading the gospel aligns as one of the core values of of some denominations of Christianity. I don't think it makes them any less noble or any more humble by not by spreading the gospel, because to them that's what they believe they should do. Just like we should keep kosher, them going out and saying, "Find Jesus in your heart" is the way to.
Yeah, do Jews bash other Jews because they're not keeping kosher?
Some do.
Yeah, but I'm saying on a large scale, not the few that are more radical.
I can't tell you. I can't tell you that, like, no, but you look at percentage-wise between Christians and those who bash. I don't know. I can't comment on bashing about observance.
I lost track of the question. What was the main point you were delivering again?
So I was introducing a discussion of multiculturalism, and the point that I wanted to make is they give you a rule how to behave, and they give you an explanation of why, and the two don't fit together because
they're evaluating from their own pedestal.
That's right. Even though they've told you, you can't evaluate. So that's an inconsistency. That's not. Now there's another reason that sometimes they give, and that is no one can really understand another culture. I don't know if you've heard the parable. This comes from India, but it's a fairly well-known parable of 4 men who went into a cave, completely dark cave, and they're feeling their way. And they had different experiences, and they came out, and each one said, wow, let me tell you what I felt in there. One says, I felt a long, flexible rope. And the other one says, I felt a fat, solid pillar. And the third one said, I felt a big piece of material that felt like a sail. Another one said, I felt a hose with a hole in it. Now, the joke is supposed to be that what's in the cave is an elephant. And the first one felt the tail of the elephant, and the second one felt the leg of the elephant, and the third one felt the ear of the elephant, and the fourth one felt the trunk of the elephant. That's supposed to be and this is supposed to illustrate the idea that when you come to life, to the world, to interactions, to understanding things, you come from the concepts and the experiences that your culture provides. And each culture provides a person with a different perspective. And that being the case, we look at the world in different ways, and there's really no real communication between cultures, no really sharing between cultures, and if so, there's not going to be a real mutual understanding between cultures. And that being the case, again, the idea of declaring that one culture is superior to another is off the books. We actually had a boy here about 15 years ago, came in, a Jewish boy, had experience in India, and he told this parable to the class. So I said, I would like to ask you about this parable. When the 4 men came out and they told each other what they had felt, did anyone suggest going back in and this time joined by a cord so that when one person felt something, he could pull on the cord and bring everybody else so they could feel it also? And then each one, when he feels something, will pull on the cord and everybody will have the same feelings. And then they'll share their picture. Did anybody think of that? Did the 4 men think of that? Did the wise men in India think of that continuation and ask what its consequences would be? Does the story really show that you can't understand someone else's point of view, someone else's culture? Does it really show that? Doesn't it set an artificial limitation on it where there's no communication or no sharing of experience? So let's follow this idea out. What about someone from Somalia who migrates to New York City? Does he manage to drive on the highways and get to a destination without causing mayhem? A lot of rules there and a lot of customs there. Does he manage? How does he manage? How could he learn that? He's from Somalia. Yeah, but somehow they manage, don't they? I mean, isn't that true? Or international chess competitions. You have people from many different countries in the world, many different cultures. They all play chess. They all play chess by the same rules, right? I mean, don't they, in fact, understand one another and share certain aspects of life together? Why would you think that? Because you start out life with your own unique set of resources that you can't come to understand somebody else. I'll ask another question. There are people who deal with addictions. Let's say this guy grew up in Beverly Hills, and he went to Harvard. He has a PhD in psychology, and his subject matter is addictions. Well, the people he treats didn't grow up in Beverly. Well, they might have, but a lot of them didn't grow up in Beverly Hills and didn't go to Harvard and didn't come up in his economic class. How could he possibly understand them? How could he deal with them? He's a psychologist. Isn't he just completely out of the water? Completely off base? Trying to help the psychology of a person coming from a very different cultural, educational, economic, values background from him. But somehow we managed to actually do it. So is it really true that you can't communicate with people in another culture? And then let's push the idea of values, because values is where they say it always happens, where you can't compare values. And here I'm going to take your attitude. I'm just going to use it a little bit differently, but I'm going to take your attitude because I think that attitude is very important. I'm visiting a South Sea island. I happen to have a medical education. This is a fantasy. And I'm visiting South Sea Island. And I get to know the natives and become friendly. And one day, one of the South Sea Islanders comes up to me, clutching his lower left abdomen, and he's in terrible pain. I know about that. That could be appendicitis. Wow. Well, listen, I never travel without my handy-dandy portable X-ray machine. So I take it out and I do an X-ray of his. There it is. By golly, a red, inflamed, bloated appendix. Oh, well, I have my anesthesia, which I never travel without, and my scalpel, which I never travel without, and I'm a trained surgeon, so I perform appendicitis. Now let's see. The X-ray machine was made in Chicago. Chicago isn't the South Sea Island. Chicago's another culture. How could one culture make something that's useful in another culture? I mean, they're divided. They can't understand one another. They live in different worlds. And the anesthesia was manufactured in Paris. And the scalpel was made in Sheffield, England. But still, couldn't I really perform appendicitis there and save the guy? So is it really true that cultures can't interact with one another and they can't recognize values from another culture? Won't that guy be happy that I saved his life when I do the appendectomy? I'll give you another example. There are places in the world, this is real, where when somebody needs a house, the whole community gets together and builds a house. I think the Amish do it in America, and there are other cultures where it's done. Now, let's say that this is how they do it. They build the walls, they put up a roof, and then they put in the flooring. And the flooring is based on stones in a quarry. And the stones in the quarry are all the same size and shape. They're all square, 1 foot by 1 foot. And here's how they do it. Once they put up the walls, they send a group of guys down to the quarry. Yes, I'm sexist. They send a group of guys down to the quarry to bring up stones. And they take the stones and they put it on the floor. If there aren't enough, they send the guys down to bring more. If there are too many, then they bring the remainder back, and that's how they do it. So I watched this a couple of times, and then I think, I'm going to help these guys out. They put up the walls. When nobody's looking, I measure the walls. The walls are 8 feet by 10 feet. 8 feet by 10 feet. And the stones in the quarry are 1 foot square. So when it comes time to get stones from the quarry, and each person can carry back 2 stones, I count out 40 guys, and I say, you guys go and get stones. So they go, and they come back. 10 times 8 is 80, is 80 square feet, right? And by golly, they have exactly the right number of stones. It fits the floor perfectly. They don't have to get more. They don't have the extras back. They say to me, how did you do that? How did you do that? We never get it right the first time, almost never. It's probably by chance, but you got it right the first time. I said, well, I'm using geometry, magic, right? Which was invented in Greece. Well, but we're not in Greece now. This isn't a Greek culture. This is a South Sea Islander culture, or an African culture, or an Asian culture, or hinterlands, interior of Australia. How can you use a Greek cultural product to help people in a different culture? But you can, can't you? Don't you expect this to work? So the barriers, and they'll realize it. They realize that when they do it, they have extra work to do. Bring back the extras or go down again to get more. And when you do it my way, then I have that extra work. So something definitely that they could learn from and they could benefit. And couldn't they say, wow, the Greeks have something valuable that we don't have? Because it's useful for them with their values. So if that's the case, couldn't there be a cross-cultural evaluation? They, with their values, say, these fellows have something we don't have, and something will be good for us. So they're better off than we are. By whose values? By their own values. You're better off by your own values. And therefore they could contribute something. And then cultures could learn from one another. Cultures could benefit from one another. Now let me take another example, which is slightly more controversial, and then we'll get to the real controversy. There have been cultures, subsistence cultures, where basically each person or each family provides for itself what it needs for itself. So each family will build its own logic, and each family will spin its own clothes, each family will grow its own food, and if necessary produce its own weapons. No division of labor. Each family does everything for itself. I call it subsistence because they're lucky if they survive. There is a procedure which was invented in the West called division of labor, where one guy just farms. All he does is raise food. And another guy produces clothes. That's all he does. Another guy builds houses. Another guy builds weapons. First of all, you get good at it. And you figure out strategies, become more efficient. Of course, you have to exchange. You have to have at least bargain, goods exchange in the culture. But in that way, you increase productivity tremendously because different people are good at different things. So people can do that section of the work that needs to be done that they're good at and be more productive. So couldn't you teach this to this society and say, look, here's a better way of doing things? Now, it might not work. They might have values of independence and isolation and not trusting other people. It might not work. So you can't guarantee it will always work because it might not fit with their psychology. But it might work. After all, when it was invented in the West, it didn't spread all over the world. It didn't spread because people forced them with bayonets to adopt it. It's just very much more productive. So they adopted it. So again, doesn't seem like there's a barrier for talking about what's valuable, what isn't valuable, cross-culturally, and borrowing from one another, and realizing that you have something to learn. I mean, the Americans proved their cultural superiority by spreading jeans and jazz and Coke all over the world. Okay, that's something. Coke is something. Coke is only second to Chabad. You find Coke everywhere. You can find Chabad where people, even where there's no Coke. So that seems to be a case of where there's communication and where there's mutual understanding and where there's sharing and where there's evaluation. The final barrier is where you say, okay, look, efficiency is something and saving people's lives is something. But what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's evil, what's just and what's unjust, what's forbidden or what's required, obligatory, that definitely varies from culture to culture, and there's no way to judge that one culture is any better than any other culture. Just simply a matter of their own form of life, their own style of life. So I think this is wrong, and I want to start with a minor a smaller revision, and then I'm going to attack the whole thing at the base. How far can we imagine this disagreement about values to go? Is there any limitation to it? In this culture, torturing small children for fun is perfectly morally permissible because they have different moral values from us. We think it's a crime, and they think it's permissible. Is that kind of thing really imaginable? So let me run through some experiences that everybody has and see if we can draw a moral from it. Suppose you're having a discussion with somebody and he says something which sounds to you to be really wrong. He says, the only thing that's right to believe is the first thing you think when you think about a question, and you should never change your mind. He says that. And you think, what? I mean, what is he talking about? Don't we all make mistakes? And often the first idea that you have is very superficial. Maybe you should ask somebody else what they think and take it into account. So what do you want? So wouldn't your response say to him would be, what do you mean? I don't understand you. Now those words are very important. What do you mean? And I don't understand you says, if I took you literally, if I thought your words mean what my words mean, I would know that you're making a stupid mistake. But I have good reason to think that you're not stupid. So I can't imagine that we mean the same thing. So I have to ask you what you mean. I'll give you a more simple and grand example. Philip comes in, nobody here named Philip, right? Philip comes in one morning, he says, guys, I've discovered something. There are no tables. Hello, Philip. What? There are no tables? Yeah, there aren't any tables. There just aren't any tables. No tables in the world. Just there aren't. They don't exist. Wouldn't you say to him, Philip, hello? What do you mean, Philip? Because you couldn't mean what I mean by there are no tables. It's just too obviously wrong. So you must mean something else. When the person says that, either he means something else, or he's joking, or he's crazy, because the proposition is just obviously wrong. We won't tolerate certain types of disagreement. We won't tolerate them, because they differ from the facts too far. Now, if a person says, it could be in your culture or a different culture, a person says, it's morally permissible to torture small children for fun, that's so obviously immoral, it's so obviously criminal, it's so obviously evil that you can't take the disagreement seriously. I'll give you another example to try to, set the stage for this. You're traveling in rural China on a vacation, and people say, listen, we have something we do here, maybe you'll be interested and you'll like to observe it. They play a game. This game is played on horseback in shallow creeks of water, and there's a lead ball, and every person on the horseback has a stick, and there are two teams. And the idea is to push the ball. One team is pushing the ball upstream, and the other is pushing the ball downstream, and they're facing each other in the stream, and they're competing to push the lead ball. I said, wow, that's interesting. Talking something new. And I said, by the way, we have a name for this game. It's called Chinese chess. You play chess on a board with pieces, and we play it in the stream with lead balls. How would you deal with that? Chinese chess? It's not chess at all. Now, Chinese chess, it's not Alpha Centauri chess, it's not chess. Why do you call it chess? No relationship to chess. If you told me that you play chess and they don't allow castling, okay, I hear that. Castling is one rule, and it's used, once in a game, and okay, I hear that you might want to make a variation on chess. But this isn't chess at all. And somebody says, what do you mean? It's their chess. Don't be imperialistic. Don't impose on their culture. In their culture, that's what chess is. I don't think that's right. Because words have meaning, and the words have to be used according to their meaning. Now I'm going to push this really deep. We're discussing this issue in English. We're discussing how to think about other cultures. We're discussing what values are. We're discussing about differences. When we say morality, that's an English word. So if I'm going to talk about morality in a different culture, I'm using my English word with my English concept to talk about their world, to talk about their culture. If somebody says to me, well, their morality is utterly different from yours, I don't have to credit that, because if it's utterly different, it won't be what I call morality. And since I'm having my discussion in English, the question in my mind is, what shall I say in English about this culture? So I don't have to apologize for my values. As I say, but their values might be different. If they're really different, then they aren't what I call values, so they aren't different values. Well, that's very imperialistic of you. That's very unaccommodating. It's very intolerant of you. Well, yeah, like Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, the facts are the facts. And if you want what you do to qualify for my term moral, then you got to live up to the standards of my term moral. And you may not care about that. I'm not telling you that you have to care about it. I might tell you that separately. But in the meantime, don't tell me how I, in my language, have to describe you when you're violating the rules of my language. It's just a mistake. Now, I'm using a principle that Willard Van Orman Quine used in an extremely different context, and I'm sure if he were alive, he would want to shoot me for using it this way, but it's right anyhow. It's right anyhow. I'll give you one more example, then we should stop and discuss this. There was a Jewish French social scientist, Claude Lévi-Strauss, who claimed to have discovered prelogical peoples. He claimed these people could believe it is raining here and now, and it is not raining here and now, because they haven't developed logic, and therefore their thoughts could be illogical. So I forget who Quine criticized the idea later. This was, I think, in the late 19th century. But the thought was this: you say they believe it's raining now, it's not raining now. Why do you believe that? Why do you think that they believe it? Why do you say that? Well, they speak another language, but I lived with them for 3 months and I learned their language. You did. You learned their language. Maybe you didn't learn it right. Maybe the way you're translating what they say isn't the correct translation. You all know what kangaroos are. I'm told that when the English opened up Australia in the middle of the 19th century, and they saw the natives, they learned the word kangaroo by watching the natives. Later on, it was discovered that kangaroo in native Australia meant, there it goes, because the kangaroos were always hopping away. So kangaroo wasn't a name for the species, it was a comment on the activity that was running. They only said it when they saw kangaroos, but of course it happened that they only saw kangaroos running also, so they mixed it up. You say they have illogical thoughts because you understand their language to say that they have illogical thoughts. Maybe your understanding the language is wrong. Let me ask you a question. Do these people have agriculture? Do these people have shared activities or shared projects? If they don't have basic logic, how could they do that? How could they do that? Their idea of reality and reaction to reality are going to be complete jumble. Imagine you're fighting a battle. You live in a city and the enemy's attacking the city, and you're shooting arrows from the wall down at the enemy soldiers, and you're running out of arrows. And you say to your friend down below, bring me arrows! And he says, coming up! And he comes back with a cup of hot chocolate. If that's the way the interactions go, are you going to be able to defend the city? Are you going to be able to plant apple seeds and expect to get apples? You'll be out of touch with reality entirely. If these people are alive from day to day and they have a communal culture, it couldn't be that they have pre-logical thoughts like that they don't have a simple logic in their minds. So we're not going to tolerate the idea that they have a different logic, where according to their logic, it can be raining and not raining at the same time, because that would destroy their functionality. So again, but you're just using your logic. I've had students say this. You're using Western logic to criticize the I Ching, and I Ching is Eastern culture. Okay, still, if it's illogical, it's illogical. The end of the story, right? They could do something different instead of logic. That's something else. That's fine. They read every third word and they string them together with poetry, and that's how they read it. They don't care whether it's logic or not. They're using it for music. Fine. They don't have to care about logic, but that doesn't mean that they have something which is a different logic, and my logic isn't what I think it is, or my logic is relative. That doesn't follow. So I don't think we have to be embarrassed at all to use our values to evaluate other cultures. I don't know if you know who Dinesh D'Souza is, but he's a conservative social critic, writes books and makes movies. And a book that he wrote, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago, he interviewed a co-ed at Stanford who learned about forced clitorectomy for girls in certain African cultures. And they cut off the clitoris as babies. And she was asked how she feels about that. So she said, well, I'm conflicted over it. On the one hand, I'm a woman, I believe in women's rights, I'm in protecting women and so forth and so on. So I would think that it's a crime. On the other hand, it's their culture. Who am I to criticize their culture? So they gave her time to think about it, and then she came to the conclusion that I can't say anything about somebody else's culture. I think she came to the wrong conclusion. What she should say is, this is victimization, and it's wrong, and if they don't recognize that, that just means that they don't live up to moral values, and I, as a moral person, have reason to improve the world by calling it into it. In India, until the British conquered India, the custom was that when a man dies, his body is burned, and his living wife jumps into the fire to die with him. Well, the British stopped that. And then when they chased the British out, they didn't reinstate it. Can you guess why not? Because they came to see that the British way of doing things is superior to that. And that really wasn't a good idea. Yeah, you want to say something?
Yeah, I don't think the fact that my logic is correct, if I impose my logic or my moral beliefs onto another culture, it doesn't make what they're doing wrong. In terms of, if I disagree with something that they're doing, we're both right in our own terms, right?
I don't think that's correct. Okay. I don't think that's correct.
What about jihadists?
I'm sorry?
What about jihadists?
So what about jihadism? This is a very interesting point. Let me start with the Nazis, and then I'll come to the jihadists also. Did the Nazis have different values from other people? Did they say, look, we both agree that Jews are clean, and Jews are intelligent, and Jews are hardworking, and Jews are honest, and so forth and so on. The difference between us is, you support people like that, and we kill people like that. That's just the difference. You support that. We have different values about what to do about them, and right? That's not what they said. Famously, that's not what they said at all. What did they say? They said Jews are Jews lie, and Jews cheat, and they poison the wells, and they drink Christian blood for Pesach, and so on and so on. Why did they make up those stories? Why did they bother? Because if Jews are evil, then opposing them is good and right. Morally, with the old morals, with the same morals, it's self-protection. You're protecting Jews who are out to rule the world and destroy it. They told the story because they want to use the old values, not because they had new values. Same thing happened in the United States. I don't know if you've heard of this. They don't teach it anymore in schools because they don't want to be objective. Manifest destiny. Manifest destiny meant when the 13 colonies occupied the east coast of North America, the future that was fated that they should spread and conquer and take over the whole continent, the whole area of the United States. Of course, there were people there already, some anyway. No, they weren't noble savages, but they were people. And to take over all that land, to take their land, that's not nice. I mean, how can you just take other people's land? You know what the solution was? They're not people. They're not human. The Redskins aren't human. They're some kind of animal. Oh, great! You could take the land of a cow or a wolf. That's not a problem. You change the facts because you want to use the same old values. You specifically don't have other values. So, and if someone claims that in that culture they say that torturing small children for fun is right, if they say that, I say you're misusing their language, because if you translate their language into English, right, the words in their language don't mean this in English. Because if it meant this in English, then they would be saying something that's obviously wrong. And they're not saying something obviously wrong. So maybe when you translate it as right, what they mean is, it's what the chief says. And we've pledged ourselves to do what the chief says. Fine, that could be true. It is what the chief says. And you can pledge allegiance just like people can pledge allegiance to evil. They don't have to, But it's not correct to say that for them it's right because their culture is different. And by the way, when I talk about judging them and evaluating them, I'm not supposing that I imposed it on them. I'm sitting here at home. I'm sitting in my university office and I'm talking about, the Bengal jungle or something. So I'm not imposing it on them. I'm simply describing what their life is like. Now, you take a look, for example, at the Spartans. The Spartans let children die, starve to death. But they didn't do it for fun. They believed that they were under pressure from other Greek city-states, and if they don't do everything to improve their strength, then they're going to be conquered, and that's going to be very bad for them. So this was really a matter of the lesser of two evils. So that's a different position altogether. At any rate, the bottom line here is we don't have to be embarrassed about using our values to evaluate, at least to the extent of not thinking that, well, you're using Western justice, you're using Western benevolence, you're using Western obligation and prohibition to evaluate another culture which doesn't have those elements. You don't have to be embarrassed in doing that anymore. You have to be embarrassed to use geometry, or to use division of labor, or to use an X-ray machine. If it fits, it fits. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. Sometimes it won't fit, for example, because they don't have the same institutions that we have, like marriage. They might not have marriage. So then what we think of as the obligations of marriage won't come up. I think it was Hume who said, the idea of property is a product of scarcity. You have to know who, because different people want it, and some people want yours, and so on and so on. But suppose you had more than enough of everything. It grew on trees. It grew on the ground, you wouldn't need it. So then the idea, it's mine, it's yours, you take it. There's another one over here. You wouldn't have to have that. So there's sometimes where the circumstances don't support the institution. That could be. But it's not that in that culture it's permissible to steal other people's property. It's that there's no property.
Isn't there like a level to it? For example, like the immigration or immigration crisis in America, in Europe, the narrative's like, okay, we have a percentage of people that are immigrants in our country, they're rapists, murderers, etc. They use that narrative, and instead of taking out that small percentage, which it could end up being millions of people, right? Whatever the numbers are, they end up using that as like the agenda to get people to say, you know what, immigration it is affecting our economy, our culture. You're taking jobs, and then they use that narrative to spread, and then everyone's like, you know what, get all of them out, and it solves that problem in their way.
Well, I don't think that's the narrative exactly, and I think it's a matter of discussion. I think the narrative is not that they're taking jobs. They were brought in because
Well, it's only negatives why they want them out. It's jobs, raping, murdering, stealing.
Well, okay, but now jobs is the other way around. They wanted them to come in the beginning because they needed their labor, because the natives don't want to do that labor. But it's more than that. It's not just that they are criminal. It's that they've imported a culture that preaches that they should do those criminal actions, and they won't accommodate themselves to, let's say, British culture at all. So they come in as enemies. Now, no nation is obligated to take in other people just because they want to come.
Yeah.
So, as should be obvious, but needs to be emphasized over and over again, being accepted as an immigrant to a country is a privilege. You want to come in. We didn't ask you to come. We're not advertising places to come. We're not paying for your fare to come. You want to come in.
Yeah.
Well, behave the way we want you to behave. If you come in with a culture, we come in to burn American flags and say we hate America and death to America, we don't need you here. Why did you come to us in the first place? To try to destroy us from within? You came as enemies to destroy us?
Yeah.
Then why not get rid of them? They've declared that they're enemies, so get them out. The whole idea that we owe them something is ridiculous. We don't owe them anything. And as the people have pointed out, I haven't heard a decent answer to it. If America is so terrible, America is so racist, America is the worst country on earth, why is it that millions and millions of people every year are trying to get in? Are they crazy? Are they masochistic? They're self-destructive? If it's such a terrible place, go back to Somalia. It's absolutely. Yeah, you want to say something? I got to go.
Rabbi mentioned earlier that there are cases where a person from one culture could say things that another person simply cannot tolerate because they contradict very greatly with that other person's language or values. Aren't there cases where it may look like they're obviously contradicted, but really they're not actually contradicted?
That's my point. That was my point about asking a person, what do you mean? Because you couldn't have made that mistake. You couldn't be saying something so stupid. So at that point, I assume, I don't know what you mean. And that's why I said the translation from the other language may be a wrong translation. You, Levi Strauss, say they believe it's raining now here and it's not raining now here? Sorry, that's too nuts to think they believe that. You're not getting their thought right. You're mistranslating their language and you're not getting their thought right. So, and that's exactly the point that I'm making, because when you look at the person and you say he survives from day to day, if he had a mind like that, he couldn't survive. It's just a wrong translation. Translation is a big deal. That Klein and Davidson and other people made it into a big deal in philosophy, the philosophy of translation. It's a very, very tricky subject. Okay, tomorrow I'll start with a summary of what we did today, and we'll push on to do a little more. Yes, Hashem.